Welcome to Authors and Innovators, our series focused on authors, innovators, and big thinkers. And we have another one today. Professor Jacqueline Jones is a writer, a scholar, Professor Emerita from the University of Texas, and the winner of the 2024 Pulitzer Prize in History. Congratulations, Professor Jones. This is exciting.
Thank you so much.
So her fifth, I think it's your fifth book, is just...
Actually, it's my 10th.
The 10th book. Boy, am I behind. I've got some reading to do. Her terrific book is called No Right to an Honest Living, The Struggles of Boston's Black Workers in the Civil War Era. I found this fascinating in large part because to study history is to study change. It gives us the tools to know the present, engage with the past, and impact the future. And this book really speaks to the roots of Black entrepreneurship, and it goes way back by necessity. So how is this book different than others that you've crafted before?
Well, certainly I wanted to focus specifically on the issue of work here. I am a labor historian, and obviously many books about the Civil War era focus on battles and generals, but I wanted to look at the home front in a northern city. And I was drawn to Boston because of its reputation at the time as a center of radical abolitionism. Certainly, there were many well-known abolitionists, activists, authors, speakers who commanded national attention and gave the impression that Boston was an egalitarian city. And I found that was not the case, that the rhetoric of the abolitionists certainly did not meet or did not reveal what was happening in the workplace there in the city.
And the title comes from a quote, I think, from John Rock, who was amazing. Right. Just amazing.
Dr. John S. Rock, yes, he was trained originally as a dentist, then as a physician. He gave public lectures on French literature. Eventually, during the war, he became a lawyer and was the first Black person to admitted to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Wow.
So he was very erudite, but he was also very courageous because the title of the book is from a speech he gave in 1860, where he said, abolitionists care more about the suffering slave in the South than they do about their own Black neighbors in the city of Boston.
In their own backyard. Can you set the scene for us a bit as a historian? Massachusetts banned slavery. As you said, there was a lot of soaring rhetoric from people like William Lloyd Garrison. So from sort of the time of the Constitution up to the Civil War, what did it look like, and what did it look like for Black Americans?
Well, certainly, again, Massachusetts was in the forefront of Black civil rights. The Constitution of 1780 gave Black men the right to vote. By 1860, Black and white children attended school together, and Blacks and whites could marry each other. Black people were beginning to serve on juries in Massachusetts in 1860. So by a large number of measures, again, Massachusetts was progressive in that regard. But what I do in the book is contrast those constitutional rights to the right to an honest living. And of course, the right to work to a decent wage is not enshrined in the Constitution. So this was a struggle on the ground that, again, was a contrast to, as what you said, was soaring rhetoric there in the public sphere.
And some Blacks in Boston were able to achieve great status as ministers, doctors, lawyers, but you focused on the narrative, which I found fascinating, of this group from Virginia, formerly enslaved people who were released via will and testament, and came here assuming that things would be better here. Can you set the scene a bit around from Carter Edlow all the way to that caravan of hopeful people who got here and found that things were not exactly as rosy as they had expected?
Yes, in September of 1847, 66 formerly enslaved people from the Carter Edlow plantation in the Virginia Tidewater arrived in Boston. They had been freed by their owner's will, although he died in 1844, and it took them 3 years, 3 long years, to secure the freedom that he had promised them in his will. They arrived, they were interlocking families, I think maybe 5 extended families, men, women, children, from infants, I think, to someone who was 80 years old. And they did. They chose to come to Boston, again, because it was a destination of many freedom seekers, many fugitives from slavery in Virginia. So they had heard about Boston that way. The reality, of course, I think was probably a shock to them. And I focus, for instance, on Peter Randolph, who was a skilled blacksmith in Virginia as an enslaved person and came to Boston and could not find a job as a blacksmith because those jobs were dominated by white people, and white customers would not patronize a blacksmith. So he became what was called a tender, which was kind of an all-around custodian,
catch-all,
messenger,
right.
and eventually became a minister. But most of this group of 66 did settle in Boston, and they did begin to work. One of the most stable of these workers was Carter Selden. I follow his son, Thomas, who was a soldier in the Massachusetts 55th. And I suggest that stability of work was the key here to a stable family life. Many of these workers, of course, could not aspire to a better job, a better paying job, a job that took advantage of their talents, but rather had to hope to keep a job because so many of these workers were casual laborers, which meant that they really had to search almost every day for some work here or there for an hour or two. So again, the long-term stability was a key feature to the welfare of these families.
What struck me is how resourceful, resilient, and creative these folks were. Truly this entrepreneurial mindset. Talk a little bit about Anthony Burns in the book, because that's a fascinating chapter as well.
Anthony Burns, again, was one of these fugitives from slavery. He had worked at a variety of tasks in Richmond, Virginia, and managed to escape by sea on board a ship, as many of these Virginia freedom seekers did. He came to Boston in early 1854 and right away began to look for a job. And I thought this was significant because for many of these fugitives, the flight itself was traumatic. And to then land in a new city and immediately begin wage earning, I thought was quite a challenge.
Amazing.
So Anthony Burns met a man named William Jones who took him around to various places as they looked together for work in Boston. And that description of Jones and Burns going from a dancing master's studio to a pharmacy to a hotel to a second-hand clothing store, that description gave me a clue about what it was like for many men who had to look for work every day. As we know, Anthony Burns faced rendition to the South. He was sent back to his owner, and yet Leonard Grimes, who was the minister of 12th Baptist in Boston, managed to raise enough money to free Anthony Burns eventually, and he went to Oberlin College.
There are so many great stories in here, as I suspect you appreciate. There could be movies in and of themselves. These folks are so creative, so resourceful. What struck me, too, is part of a class that I teach at Boston College Law School, Project Entrepreneur. We do boot camp for formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs. And what I'm finding, and one of the big reasons I picked up your book, was the collateral consequences, the prohibitions on jobs, licensing, just occupational requirements really have deep roots and are continuing in a lot of cases. So I found your book just a fascinating foundation for many of the things that underlie those collateral consequences. So for members of the Black community, then you've got you describe Boston as really an ethnic mix, particularly dominated by Irish immigrants and the like. So what was it like for someone who was previously enslaved? They have to worry about the Fugitive Slave Act. They have to worry about the pronouncements from Lincoln during the Civil War, and they also have to eat. So what did this look like for someone who came here thinking, boy, it's going to be a lot better? I've heard from William Lloyd Garrison, this is going to be a more hospitable place. What did they encounter overall?
Well, obviously there were a range of experiences, but certainly, some of these fugitives could count on boarding with other people of color. And this boarding system was a way to accommodate newcomers, to help them acclimate to Boston, to help them find jobs. So in that sense, the boarding houses were key in terms of helping these newcomers to adjust. Some of these fugitives left. It was too cold. It was too inhospitable. Right. They went on to the Midwest or to Canada. So it really was a mixed bag of experiences, I think, for these fugitives. But certainly they enjoyed more freedom than they had in the South. When you read about the North End and the dance halls, and also consider the churches, the Black churches, the Black organizations, the ability of Black leaders to call meetings and to engage in very powerful political rhetoric. I mean, these are all very different experiences in Boston compared to what formerly enslaved people found in the South.
Yeah, and some of these experiences, as you describe here, they have roots even today. You talk about former Black veterans trying basically just to get the same kind of benefits that other people had. And we know, going all the way through to the GI Bill, that even though the federal government made provisions for veterans, they weren't equally applied.
Well, yes, and there are a couple of factors here. One is that Massachusetts had 3 Black units during the war: the Massachusetts 54th of glory fame, the Massachusetts 55th, and the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry. Now, most of these units, by and large, were filled with non-Massachusetts residents, and the Massachusetts 55th especially filled with men from the Midwest who could not volunteer there in their own states because their states did not accept Black soldiers. What that meant was that, though, the welfare, the charitable aid that Massachusetts gave to the families of its soldiers did not apply to the families of soldiers from outside the state.
Yeah.
So most of the families of the 55th soldiers, for instance, did not get the basic aid that white Massachusetts-born soldiers' families got. That's one issue. The other issue is that the pension system itself was rather capricious. And first of all, you needed a lot of documentation in order to apply for a pension. So you might need a birth certificate, or you might need some kind of a statement from your physician about your health. And for men who moved often, or for men who were born in the South, enslaved, and really did not even know their own birth date, these bureaucratic requirements were very difficult to meet. Added to that were the decisions by individual white physicians about who should qualify for a pension, who was unable to work, and so forth. And in some cases, these applicants needed a tremendous number of references. First of all, if they had been wounded during the war, they needed to locate other men, comrades or officers who had witnessed them when they were wounded, witnessed the act, the incident. And that was, again, very difficult to track down people many years after the war. And in other cases, these physicians were not convinced that a man who was unable to work could attribute that to his wounds during the war. So there are a lot of subjective factors involved
It
in this
was,
process.
I love that history, and the detail that you infuse throughout the book makes this so engrossing. It truly left me with the impression that certainly words can inspire people, but it is not enough to create a just society or just distribution. Professor Jones, what else are you reading these days? What do you recommend for people to sort of pair with this if they really want to dig in and learn more?
Well, there's a great history out there, and I really built on the work of historians who looked at what was essentially a civil rights revolution in the North before the Civil War, the struggle to vote and to attend integrated schools, struggle for intermarriage, and so forth. So there's a lot there. I also built on work on Black entrepreneurs. Robert Morris, the attorney who represented both blacks and whites in court. Madame Carteau, the so-called hair doctress. Joshua B.
Fascinating.
Smith, who was
Yeah.
a caterer. And John Bailey, who opened a very successful gymnasium in Boston. So my takeaway there was that these men and women succeeded to the extent that they had white clientele, but they also really were exceptional because the vast majority of black and white, of black men and women were wage earners and were not able to accumulate to enough money to own their own business.
So inspiring. I just love this book, and I hope everyone will get it. Professor Jacqueline Jones, thank you so much. Winner of the 2024 Pulitzer Prize for No Right to an Honest Living. I'm hoping that everyone who has heard us and who sees this will pick this engaging book up. It's a great read. Thank you again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.